Blue and red lights were strobing against my living room drapes like a disco for the damned. It was 2:14 a.m. I knew the exact time because the glowing red numbers on the microwave clock had been mocking me for the last 3 hours, pacing back and forth across the kitchen tiles with a 7-pound siren in my arms. My son, Toby, was 4 months old, and he had a set of lungs that could pressurize an airplane cabin. He wasn't just crying. He was broadcasting a high-frequency distress signal to the galaxy. He was red-faced, stiff as a board, and currently screaming directly into my ear canal. Colic is a special kind of hell that they don't put in the parenting brochures. It's mostly just walking in circles, bouncing gently, and whispering, "Please, for the love of God, sleep," while your brain slowly liquefies out of your ears. And now, the police were at my door. I shifted Toby to my left shoulder, where he promptly vomited a little bit of formula onto my already stained t-shirt, and opened the front door. The cool night air hit my face, shocking me a little, but not as much as the sight of 2 uniformed officers standing on my welcome mat. They looked tense, hands hovering near their belts, expecting a domestic dispute involving thrown plates, or maybe a hostage situation. Instead, they got me, a 30-year-old man wearing flannel pajama pants and 1 sock, smelling like sour milk, holding a baby who looked like a disgruntled tomato. The officer on the left, a tall guy with Miller on his name tag and bags under his eyes that rivaled mine, relaxed his posture immediately. He let out a sigh that sounded suspiciously like a parent who knew exactly what was happening. "Evening, sir," Miller said, his voice low. "We received a call about a disturbance. Reports of screaming? Possible domestic violence in progress?" I blinked, trying to process the absurdity through the fog of sleep deprivation. Toby took a breath and let out a shriek that made the officer on the right flinch. "The screaming," I said, my voice hoarse, "is him. It's the baby. He has colic." Officer Miller looked past me into the dark hallway, confirming that there wasn't, in fact, a murder taking place. Just a very unhappy infant and a very tired dad. Right. The caller stated it sounded like someone was being tortured. "I am being tortured," I said deadpan. "But it's psychological, and the torturer is wearing a diaper." Miller cracked a small smile. "We have to check, sir. You know how it is. Is your wife home?" "She's upstairs, passed out with earplugs," I whispered. "She took the shift from 8:00 p.m. to midnight. It's my turn on the rack." The second officer, a younger guy who looked like he'd never had his sleep interrupted by anything other than a video game release, peeked around Miller. "So, no domestic dispute? Just the kid?" "Just the kid," I confirmed. I shifted Toby again. "Look, I'm doing my best here. I've tried the swing, the yoga ball, the white noise machine, and begging the universe for mercy. He just needs to cry it out." Miller nodded sympathetically. "I've got 3 of my own. The first one was a screamer. It gets better, buddy." He tapped his notepad. "Sorry to wake you. Well, sorry to disturb you. We'll clear the call." "Who called it in?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. My stomach tightened. "We live in a nice neighborhood. A quiet neighborhood. The kind of place where people have live, laugh, love signs made of reclaimed wood and drive SUVs that have never seen a speck of dirt. But we also have neighbors who treat the sidewalk like their personal kingdom." Miller hesitated. "It was an anonymous noise complaint that escalated to a welfare check." "Anonymous," I scoffed. I looked past the officers, across the perfectly manicured lawn, toward the house next door. The house with the pristine white siding, the aggressively cheerful garden gnomes, and the blinds that were currently twitching. Mrs. Higgins. She was watching. I could feel it. I could see the silhouette of her bouffant hairdo backlit by a dim lamp. She was probably holding a cup of herbal tea, waiting to see me get hauled off in handcuffs so she could finally prove that my lawn maintenance schedule was indicative of a criminal mind. "We'll be going, sir. Good luck with the little guy," Miller said, tipping his cap. "Thanks," I mumbled. I closed the door and locked it. I leaned my forehead against the cool wood for a second, just breathing. Toby, sensing that the audience had left, dialed the volume down from air raid siren to grumpy whimpering. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out, squinting at the bright screen. It was a text message from Mrs. Higgins. "I see the police have left. I hope this serves as a warning. If you can't silence that brat, I will have Child Protective Services on speed dial. Some of us need our beauty sleep. Brenda H." I stared at the screen. The rage that flared up in my chest was so hot I thought it might actually wake me up fully. She had called the cops on a crying baby. And then she had the audacity to text me about it while the cruiser was still pulling out of the driveway. I didn't reply. If I replied, I would say things that would get me sued, evicted, or arrested. I just shoved the phone back in my pocket, walked into the kitchen, and started rocking Toby again. "It's okay, buddy," I whispered to him, my jaw clenched so hard my teeth hurt. "The bad lady can't get you, but Daddy is going to get her." The sun came up way too fast. 1 minute it was 3:00 a.m., and I was watching an infomercial about a non-stick pan that could survive a nuclear blast, and the next minute, the sun was blasting through the blinds like an interrogation lamp. Toby had finally passed out around 4:30. I had managed a choppy 2 hours of sleep on the sofa before my alarm went off. I had to log into work remotely at 8:00, but first, I needed coffee. I needed enough coffee to kill a horse. I shuffled into the kitchen. My wife, Sarah, was already there, looking marginally more human than I felt. She was rinsing a bottle in the sink. She looked at me with pity. "Rough night?" she asked softly. "The roughest," I grunted, fumbling with the coffee grounds. "Higgins called the cops." Sarah froze, the bottle brush suspended in midair. "She did what?" "She called 911, said there was a disturbance. 2 officers showed up at 2:15, Miller and some other guy. They were nice, but Sarah, she called the police because Toby was crying." Sarah's face went from tired to furious in a split second. "I'm going over there." "No," I said, holding up a hand. "Don't. If you go over there, you'll scream, she'll record it, and she'll send it to the HOA board as proof that we're unstable. You know how she operates. She's a sniper. She waits for you to mess up." "So we just let her call the cops on us?" Sarah slammed the bottle down on the drying rack. "Mark, she threatened CPS last week because the stroller was on the porch for 20 minutes. "I know," I said, pouring the dark, life-giving sludge into a mug that said, "World's okayest golfer." I got a text from her, too. She said she needs her beauty sleep. "She needs a soul," Sarah muttered. I drank the coffee. It burned, which was good. It reminded me I was alive. "I'm going to get the mail. Maybe my paycheck came. God knows we need it since you're on unpaid leave." "Don't remind me," she sighed. "We're bleeding money, Mark." "I know. I'll figure it out." I put on my shoes. Well, I put on slides over my socks because I had given up on fashion roughly 4 months ago, and walked out the front door. The morning was aggressively pleasant. Birds were chirping, the sun was shining, and the sprinklers were hissing rhythmically. It was a beautiful day in the suburbs, which made me want to punch a tree. I walked down the driveway to the cluster of mailboxes at the end of the cul-de-sac. And there she was, Mrs. Higgins. She was standing by her rose bushes, wearing a floral gardening hat and holding a pair of shears like a weapon. She didn't look up as I approached, but I knew she saw me. She had the radar of a bat. I opened my mailbox, empty, except for a flyer for a pizza place and a thick, cream-colored envelope with the official seal of the Oak Creek Homeowners Association. My stomach dropped. "Good morning, Mark," Mrs. Higgins chirped. Her voice was like grinding glass. I turned slowly. "Mrs. Higgins." She snipped a dead head off a rose with a violent snick. "I trust you got the message last night. The police are very helpful when it comes to noise ordinances." "You called the police on an infant," I said, keeping my voice level. "He has colic. He's in pain." "He's a nuisance," she corrected, not even looking at me. "And frankly, it reflects poorly on your parenting. If you can't, control your child. Perhaps you shouldn't live in a community that values tranquility. This isn't a tenement, Mark. It's Oak Creek." "He's a baby," I said, my grip tightening on the envelope. "Babies cry. It's literally the only thing they know how to do besides eat and poop." "Well, fix it," she said, turning her back to me. "Or I'll make sure the fines pile up until you have to sell that sedan of yours just to pay the interest." I stood there for a moment, fantasizing about throwing the pizza flyer at her head. But I didn't. I walked back to the house, my blood boiling so hot I could hear my pulse in my ears. I walked into the kitchen and ripped open the cream-colored envelope. Notice of violation. To Mr. Mark and Mrs. Sarah Daniels. From Oak Creek HOA Board of Directors. Violation, noise nuisance, excessive decibels after curfew. Description: repeated reports of uncontrolled wailing and screaming emanating from the residents between the hours of 1:00 a.m. and 4:00 a.m. This is a violation of Bylaw Section 4.2. Right to quiet enjoyment. Fine assessment: $250 Hazarders. Note: further violations will result in escalating fines of $500 and potential legal action. I stared at the paper. $250. For a baby crying. "What is it?" Sarah asked, seeing my face. I handed her the letter. She read it, and I watched the tears well up in her eyes. Not sad tears. Angry, helpless tears. "We can't afford this, Mark. We're already dipping into savings for the formula and the doctor bills. $250. That's our grocery budget for 2 weeks." "I know," I said. "She's on the board," Sarah whispered. "She signed it. Look." Sure enough, right at the bottom, Brenda Higgins, secretary. She was fining me. She was using the neighborhood government to extort money from me because my son had a stomachache. I sat down at the kitchen table and put my head in my hands. The exhaustion was heavy, like a wet wool blanket. I felt trapped. We couldn't move. We'd just bought this place 2 years ago. We couldn't stop the baby from crying. Believe me, we'd tried. And we couldn't afford to pay a fine every time Toby had a bad night. I looked around the kitchen. It was a nice house. Too big for us, really. We had bought it thinking we'd have 2 or 3 kids, fill the rooms up. Right now, the guest room downstairs was just sitting empty, collecting dust and boxes of old college textbooks. Wait. I looked at the letter again. Bylaw Section 4.2. Right to quiet enjoyment. I stood up and walked over to the junk drawer where we kept the massive 3-inch binder that contained the Oak Creek Covenants, Conditions, and Restrictions, CCNRs. I hadn't read it since the day we moved in. "What are you doing?" Sarah asked, wiping her eyes. I'm looking for the rules, I said, flipping through the pages. If she wants to play by the book, I need to know exactly what the book says. I found the section on noise. I scanned the legalese, my finger tracing the lines. Section 4.2. Noise restrictions. No noise shall emanate from the property that disturbs the peace between the hours of 8:00 p.m. and 8:00 a.m. Okay, standard. But what about the day? Section 4.3. Daytime noise allowances. Between the hours of 8:00 a.m. and 8:00 p.m., residents are permitted to engage in reasonable construction, landscaping, usin, and recreational activities. Noise levels during these hours shall not exceed 85 decibels at the property line for a duration longer than 4 consecutive hours. I paused. 85 decibels. That's loud. That's lawnmower right next to your ear. Loud. That's blender crushing ice. Loud. And there was no restriction on the type of noise, just the volume and the duration. Sarah, I said slowly, we need money, right? Yes, she sniffled. And we have a spare room downstairs. The one with the sliding glass door that faces Mrs. Higgins' garden? Yeah, why? I think we should rent it out, I said, a dark, manic grin spreading across my face, to help with the fines, but we need a specific kind of tenant. Someone who needs a place to stay during the day. Someone who is very, very dedicated to their hobby. Sarah looked at me like I'd lost my mind. Who? I don't know yet, I said. But I'm going to find them. I grabbed my laptop and opened Craigslist. I cracked my knuckles. The fatigue was gone, replaced by the pure, adrenaline-fueled clarity of revenge. I started typing. Title: Spare room for rent in upscale suburb. Musicians preferred. Description: Large room available in quiet, strict HOA neighborhood. Private entrance. Rent is $500 month, negotiable. Ideally looking for a musician who needs a place to practice during the day. Drummers strongly encouraged. We are a pro-noise household between the hours of 10:00 a.m. and 2:00 p.m. Do you play the drums? Do you play them loudly? Do you play death metal? Are you tired of people telling you to keep it down? Welcome home. Mastitkun. Be willing to adhere strictly to HOA daytime noise schedules. No quiet practice allowed. Loudness is a condition of the lease. I hit post. Mark, Sarah said, reading over my shoulder. Are you insane? A drummer? The baby needs to nap. Toby sleeps through the vacuum cleaner, I reminded her. He sleeps in the car with the radio on. It's the silence that wakes him up. He hates the quiet. Maybe, just maybe, he needs a little heavy metal. And Mrs. Higgins? Sarah asked, a small smile tugging at the corner of her mouth. Mrs. Higgins likes rules, I said, leaning back in my chair. I'm just following them. Section 4.3, recreational activities are permitted. I looked out the window. Mrs. Higgins was on her knees in her garden, perfectly pruning her prize-winning hydrangeas. She looked so peaceful, so smug. Enjoy it, Brenda, I thought. The concert starts soon. The responses to a Craigslist ad asking for a loud drummer in a nice suburb are exactly as weird as you'd expect. First, there was a guy named Spider who brought a bongo drum and tried to sell me oregano that he claimed was spiritual herbs. I passed. Then there was a college kid who played the trumpet, but he asked if his mom could come over and cook for him on Tuesdays. Hard pass. Then, 3 days later, he arrived. A beat-up 1998 Ford E-Series van rumbled up my driveway. It was black, rusted around the wheel wells, and had a bumper sticker that said, "Honk if you're dead." A giant emerged from the driver's side. He had to be 6'4". He was wearing a black tank top that struggled to contain shoulders the size of cantaloupes. His arms were covered in sleeves of tattoos. Skulls, snakes, things that looked like demons eating other demons. He had a beard that reached his sternum and hair that flowed down his back like a Viking warlord. He walked up to the front door, his boots thudding heavy on the concrete. He looked like the kind of guy who chewed gravel for breakfast. I opened the door. "You the guy with the room?" he asked. His voice was a deep rumble, like a subwoofer testing its limits. "I am," I said, trying not to look intimidated. "I'm Mark." "Gunner," he said, extending a hand the size of a catcher's mitt. I shook it. It was surprisingly gentle. "Come on in, Gunner." He stepped inside, ducking slightly under the doorframe. He looked around the living room, taking in the pastel colors and the baby toys scattered everywhere. "Nice place," he said. "Clean." "Thanks," I said. "So, the ad said you play?" "Yeah, drums, double bass. I play for a band called Carrion Luggage," he said seriously. "Carrion Luggage?" "Yeah, like dead bodies in a suitcase." "Right, catchy." "We're touring in the fall, but right now we're writing the new album. It's technical death metal, lots of blast beats, very fast, very loud." "Perfect," I said. "And your schedule?" "I work nights," Gunner said. "Bouncer at the Void downtown. Shift. Ends at 4 a.m. I sleep till 9. I need to practice from 10 to 2. My last landlord kicked me out because the vibrations were knocking his Hummel figurines off the shelf." I felt a thrill of excitement. "Gunner, come with me." I led him to the spare room. It was on the ground floor, right next to the side yard, specifically 10 feet away from Mrs. Higgins' bedroom window. Gunner looked at the room. "It's decent. Sliding door makes loading easy." Just then, Toby started crying from the living room. A sharp, piercing wail. Gunner flinched. He looked at me. "Kid?" "Yeah," I said nervously. 4 months old. He has colic. He cries a lot. Is that a problem?" Gunner's scary face softened instantly. He looked sad. "Colic," he rumbled. "My niece had that. Poor little dude. His gut hurts, huh?" "Yeah, it's been rough." "You want me to play drums with a colicky baby in the house?" Gunner asked, raising an eyebrow. "I'm loud, man. Like seismic." "Gunner," I said, putting a hand on his shoulder. "My neighbor, the lady who lives right on the other side of that fence, called the cops on my son for crying. She fined me $250. She hates noise. She hates life. I need someone who can follow the rules, Section 4.3 of the HOA bylaws, which states that noise up to 85 decibels is allowed between 10 a.m. and 2 p.m. Gunner looked at the fence. Then he looked at me. A slow, terrifying grin spread across his face, revealing a chipped tooth. "So," Gunner said, "you want me to be a weapon?" "I want you to be a tenant," I corrected. "Who just happens to practice vigorously during legal hours." Gunner laughed. It sounded like a rock crusher. "Mark, I think we're gonna get along just fine. When can I move my kid in?" "Right now," I said. "The driveway is yours." As we shook hands, I saw Mrs. Higgins peek through her blinds next door. She saw the van. She saw the giant metalhead. She saw the handshake. She let the blinds snap shut. I smiled. Let the games begin. The move-in process was less like moving furniture and more like the staging of a military invasion. Gunner backed his van up to the garage, the "honk if you're dead" sticker caked in mud, and threw open the back doors. I stood on the porch with Sarah, holding a cup of coffee that had gone cold, watching the show. "Mark," Sarah whispered, clutching my arm. "Is that chrome?" That is hardware, I corrected. Gunnar began unloading. He didn't have boxes of clothes or a mattress. He had cases. Hard-shell, road-worn flight cases stenciled with the words "Carrion Luggage" in a font that looked like dripping blood. He pulled out the first piece, a bass drum. It was enormous. It was a 24-inch kick drum, black with red sparkles, and on the front head was a graphic of a skeleton eating a clock. "That's festive," Sarah noted. Next came the tom-toms. 4 of them, then 2 floor toms, then a snare drum that looked like it was made of solid brass and weighed as much as a Honda Civic. Then came the cymbals, a bag of them so heavy Gunnar's bicep vein popped out like a garden hose as he lifted it. "He has a lot of drums," Sarah said, her voice trembling slightly. "He's a professional," I said, trying to sound confident. Inside, I was wondering if I had made a terrible mistake. This wasn't a drum kit. It was an artillery battery. Mrs. Higgins appeared. Of course she did. She didn't walk over. She materialized at the edge of the property line like a glitch in the simulation. She was wearing a visor and holding her phone up, vertical video mode engaged. Gunnar walked past me carrying a massive curved metal rack. "Hey, Gunnar," I said. "Meet the neighbor." Gunnar stopped, holding the metal rack effortlessly with one hand. He turned to Mrs. Higgins and smiled. It was a genuine smile, but when you are 6'4" with a beard that hides your neck and tattoos that go up to your chin, a smile can look a lot like a threat display. "Howdy," Gunnar rumbled. Mrs. Higgins took a step back, nearly tripping over her own sprinkler head. "Mark?" she hissed, ignoring Gunnar completely. "What is this?" "This is my new tenant," I said cheerfully. "His name is Gunnar. He's renting the spare room." "Tenant?" She lowered the phone, her eyes narrowing. "This is a single-family residential zone, Mark. You are running a boarding house?" Actually, the bylaws allow for up to 1 unrelated adult tenant per household provided they are registered with the HOA, I recited. I had been reading the binder all night. I was practically a legal scholar of suburban nonsense now. "Gunnar is registered. I sent the email this morning." "He looks like a criminal," she said, loud enough for Gunnar to hear. Gunnar didn't blink. "I have no criminal record, ma'am, though I did get a speeding ticket in '09. I was rushing to a sale at Guitar Center." "He plays the drums," I added. Mrs. Higgins went pale. "Drums? Here? Absolutely not. I will not have it." "He works nights," I said. "So he'll be practicing during the day, strictly within the legal hours, of course. 10 o'clock a.m. to 2 o'clock p.m. "We'll see about that," she spat. "I'm calling the president of the board." "Tell him I said hi," I waved. She stormed off, typing furiously on her phone. Gunnar watched her go, then looked at me. "She seems nice," he said dryly. "She's a ray of sunshine," I said. "Let's get this beast set up." It took Gunnar 3 hours to assemble the kit in the spare room. When he was done, the room was no longer a bedroom. It was a cockpit. The drums surrounded a central throne, a glistening forest of bronze cymbals and black shells. He had double bass pedals that looked like industrial machinery. "I dampened the bass drums a little with pillows," Gunnar said, wiping sweat from his forehead. "Takes out the ring. Makes it more punchy." "Punchy is good," I said. "We start tomorrow?" he asked. "Tomorrow," I agreed. 10 a.m. sharp. The next morning, the atmosphere in the house was tense. It felt like the moments before a rocket launch. Toby had been up since 4 o'clock a.m. He was currently in the red zone, face scrunched, fists clenched, letting out short, sharp shrieks that pierced right through your skull. Sarah was bouncing him on the yoga ball in the living room, looking like a zombie. "He's not stopping," she whispered. "Mark, he's been crying for 4 hours." "I know, honey. I know." I looked at the clock. 9:58 a.m. Downstairs, I heard the faint creak of the drum throne as Gunnar sat down. I walked to the window. Mrs. Higgins was there. She was sitting on her patio furniture, a book open in her lap, a cup of tea on the table. She was daring us. She was waiting for the first noise so she could hit the dial button on her phone. 9:59 a.m. I heard the click-click of drumsticks being tapped together. "Mark," Sarah said nervously, "is this going to be too loud for the baby?" "We're about to find out," I said. 10 a.m. It started with a snare roll, a buzz that sounded like a giant tearing a sheet of canvas. And then, the kick drums kicked in. Thump, 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 thump. It wasn't just a sound. It was a physical sensation. The floorboards vibrated. The coffee in my mug rippled like that scene in Jurassic Park. Gunnar wasn't just playing a beat. He was unleashing a rhythmic assault. It was fast. Blisteringly fast. His feet were doing 16th notes at 200 beats per minute. Crash, crash, rat-a-tat-tat, crash. The sound traveled through the floor, up the walls, and filled the house. It was loud, undeniably loud. I looked out the window. Mrs. Higgins had jumped so hard she spilled her tea all over her white capri pants. She was standing up, screaming at our house, but I couldn't hear a word she was saying. She looked like a mime having a panic attack. I looked at Sarah. She was staring at me, wide-eyed. "Mark," she mouthed. "It's loud." "I know," I yelled back, and then we both looked at Toby. The baby was in Sarah's arms. His face, which had been contorted in agony a moment ago, was now relaxed. His eyes were wide open, looking around, trying to locate the source of the thunder. He stopped crying. The vibration was constant. The double bass roll was a low-frequency hum that seemed to resonate with Toby's very soul. It was like being back in the womb, if the womb was located inside a Metallica concert. Sarah stopped bouncing. Toby blinked. His eyelids drooped. The drumming intensified. Gunnar was doing something involving all the cymbals now, a wash of white noise that sounded like a waterfall made of brass. Toby closed his eyes. His breathing slowed. His little fist unclenched. "Oh my God," Sarah whispered. I couldn't hear her, but I read her lips. "He's asleep." I started laughing. I couldn't help it. It was hysterical, manic laughter. The house was shaking. Death metal was blasting from the spare room. Mrs. Higgins was having an aneurysm on her lawn, and my colicky son was out cold for the first time in weeks. I gave Sarah a thumbs up. She looked down at the sleeping baby, looked at the vibrating floor, and just shook her head in disbelief. I walked to the front window to watch the show outside. Mrs. Higgins was on her phone. She was pointing at our house, gesturing wildly to the invisible operator. "Go ahead, Brenda," I said to the glass. "Make the call." The police arrived at 10:22 a.m. It was record time, honestly. Mrs. Higgins must have used the phrase active shooter or bomb threat to get them here that fast. I saw the cruiser pull up. It was Officer Miller again. The poor guy looked like he wanted to retire immediately. He stepped out of the car, adjusting his belt. He didn't look scared, though. He looked annoyed. He walked up the driveway. Mrs. Higgins intercepted him before he could even get to the porch. She was practically vibrating with rage. "You hear it?" she screamed, pointing a trembling finger at my garage. "You can hear it from here." It's assault. Sonic assault. Miller held up a hand to silence her and walked to my door. He rang the bell. I couldn't hear the bell, obviously, but I saw him, so I opened the door. The music poured out of the house like water from a broken dam. Da-da-da-da, crash, da-da-da-da, crash. Miller winced. "Mr. Daniels," he shouted over the blast beats. "Officer Miller," I shouted back, grinning. "Good to see you again. Come on in." He stepped inside. Mrs. Higgins tried to follow him. "Stay there, ma'am," Miller ordered, closing the door in her face. Inside the hallway, it was loud, but not ear-splitting. It was just intense. Miller looked around. "What on earth is that?" he yelled. "That is Gunner," I yelled back. "My tenant. He's practicing." "Is everything okay?" Miller asked, looking for the baby. "Never better. Follow me." I led him to the living room. Sarah was sitting on the couch, reading a magazine. Ubby was in the swing next to her. The swing was rocking gently. Toby was asleep. Mouth open, drooling, peaceful sleep. Miller stopped in his tracks. He looked at the baby. He looked at the floor, which was vibrating enough to massage his feet. He looked at me. "He's asleep?" Miller mouthed. "Out like a light," I said. "The bass frequency soothes his stomach." Miller shook his head, a look of pure bewilderment on his face. He pulled a device out of his pocket, a sound level meter. "I have to measure it," he shouted. "Procedure." "Go for it." We walked back outside. The door closed, muffling the sound slightly. Gunner was still going strong. He was playing something that sounded like a galloping horse made of iron. Miller stood on the porch. He held the meter up. Mrs. Higgins rushed over, looking triumphant. "Well?" she demanded. "Arrest him! Confiscate those drums! It's over the limit!" Miller watched the digital readout. The numbers danced. 65, 68, 72, 64. He walked to south, the property line, right where Mrs. Higgins' hydrangeas met my grass. This was the legal boundary. He held the meter steady. Gunner hit a crescendo, a massive cymbal crash followed by a machine gun snare roll. The meter peaked. Miller looked at it. He looked at Mrs. Higgins. "What does it say?" she screeched. 100? 110? 68 decibels, Miller said calmly. Mrs. Higgins froze. "That's impossible. It's deafening." "Ma'am, a lawnmower is 90 decibels, Miller said, lowering the device. "Traffic on the main road is 70. This is 68. The legal limit for daytime recreational noise in this zone is 85. But the vibration," she sputtered. "My china is rattling." "I can't measure vibration, ma'am. I measure sound pressure, and legally he is well within his rights." "This is ridiculous," she yelled, her face turning a shade of purple that matched her petunias. "He's doing this on purpose, to harass me." Miller sighed. He looked at me. "Mr. Daniels, is your tenant doing this to harass Mrs. Higgins?" "Officer," I said, putting on my most innocent face. "Gunner is a professional musician preparing for a tour. He works nights. This is the only time he can practice. We're just trying to pay the mortgage and keep the baby asleep." "Did you see the baby?" "He's sleeping." Miller nodded. "I saw the baby." He turned back to Mrs. Higgins. "Ma'am, the baby is sleeping. The decibel level is legal. The tenant is registered. There is no violation here." "I want to speak to your supervisor," Mrs. Higgins shrieked. Miller's eyes hardened. "Ma'am, You called 911. This is the second time in 12 hours you have called emergency services for a noise complaint that turned out to be unsubstantiated. If you call 911 again, and there is no blood, fire, or active felony, I am going to cite you for misuse of the emergency system. Do you understand?" Mrs. Higgins gasped. She looked from Miller to me. I gave her a polite little nod. "Good day, ma'am," Miller said. He turned to walk back to his car. Mrs. Higgins stood there, mouth agape, as the double bass drum thundered on behind me. Thump, 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 thump. It sounded like the heartbeat of victory. I waited until Miller drove away. Then I looked at Mrs. Higgins. "Hey, Brenda," I said, my voice cheerful. "Gunnar usually practices for 4 hours. So, maybe get some errands done? I hear the mall is nice this time of day." She didn't say a word. She spun on her heel and marched into her house, slamming the door so hard I heard it over the drums. I walked back inside. The house was filled with the chaotic, aggressive, beautiful sound of heavy metal. I went into the kitchen, poured another cup of coffee, and sat down. My floor was shaking. My walls were throbbing. It was the most peaceful moment I'd had in months, but of course peace in the suburbs is a fragile thing, and a Karen scorned is a dangerous enemy. 2 days later, the letter came. Mrs. Higgins hadn't given up. She had simply changed tactics. She couldn't get us on decibels, so she was going for the infrastructure. I pulled the envelope from the mailbox. It was certified mail this time. Notice of violation. Structural integrity and vibration. Nuisance. To Mr. Mark and Mrs. Sarah Daniels. From Oak Creek HOA. Board of Directors. Complaint. Several residents, Brenda Higgins, have reported seismic disturbances causing potential damage to shared foundations and retaining walls. Requirement: you are hereby ordered to cease all high-impact percussion activities immediately until a certified structural engineer provides a report proving that the vibrations are not damaging neighboring properties. I stared at the letter. She was claiming Gunnar was causing an earthquake. "She wants a structural engineer?" I muttered to myself, watching Gunnar carry a snare drum out to his van for his gig that night. "What's up, boss?" Gunnar asked, pausing. "She's trying to shut us down again," I said, waving the letter. "Says you're cracking her foundation." Gunnar laughed. "I'm good, but I'm not that good." "I need to hire a contractor," I said, thinking fast. "Someone to come in, inspect the room, and install some soundproofing." Gunnar raised an eyebrow. "Soundproofing? I thought we wanted it loud." "We do," I said, a plan forming in my mind. "I don't need actual soundproofing. I need malicious soundproofing. I need someone who knows how to follow the rules while simultaneously breaking Mrs. Higgins's spirit." "I know a guy," Gunnar said. "His name is Tony. He built the stage for Cannibal Corpse back in '98. He hates HOAs. His ex-wife is president of one." "Call him," I said. "Tell him I have a job. And tell him I want the acoustics to be directional." Gunnar grinned. "You're evil, Mark." "I'm just a dad," I said. "Protecting his family's nap time." Tony arrived the next day in a truck that looked like it had been through a war zone and won. It was a white pickup with Tony's rigging and renovation, hand-painted on the side in slightly uneven letters. The bed was full of lumber, acoustic foam, and what looked like a decommissioned cannon. Tony himself was a short, barrel-chested man with a mustache that commanded respect and a tool belt that looked like part of his anatomy. He walked up the driveway with the swagger of a man who knows exactly how load-bearing walls work. "You the guy with the metal head and the crazy neighbor?" Tony asked, not bothering with a handshake. He just squinted at the house like he was sizing up an opponent. "That's me," I said. Mark, thanks for coming. Gunnar told me the situation, Tony grunted. HOA on your back? Lady next door crying about vibrations? She claims we're cracking her foundation. Tony snorted. Unless your drummer is playing with jackhammers, that's physics-defying nonsense. But hey, people like that don't care about physics. They care about power. Let's see the room. I led him inside. Gunnar was already in the room, polishing his cymbals. He stood up when Tony walked in. "Tony!" Gunnar boomed. "Gunnar, you giant ogre!" Tony grinned, slapping Gunnar on the arm. "Still playing that satanic noise?" "Pays the bills, Tony." Tony turned to me. "All right, Mark. Here's the deal. To satisfy the HOA, you need to show you made an effort to mitigate the sound. That usually means acoustic treatment, bass traps, diffusers, foam. The works." "Right," I said. "But here's the thing, Tony. We don't actually want to be quiet. The drumming puts the baby to sleep, and it annoys Mrs. Higgins." Tony's eyes twinkled. "So you want to treat the room in a way that looks professional on paper, but acoustically, maybe redirects the energy?" "Exactly," I said. "Is that possible?" Tony walked over to the sliding glass door that faced Mrs. Higgins' house. He tapped the glass. He looked at the ceiling. He clapped his hands once, listening to the echo. "Oh yeah," Tony said, a wicked smile spreading under his mustache. "See, sound waves are like water. You can dam them up, or you can channel them. If we put heavy absorption on the back wall and the ceiling, but leave this glass door and the floor untreated, and maybe install some diffusers that are angled just right." He used his hands to demonstrate the angle. It pointed directly at Mrs. Higgins' bedroom window. "Technically," Tony continued, "I'd be installing acoustic enhancement panels. In a recording studio, you use them to brighten the sound, to project it. If I install them here, facing the glass, the sound will bounce off the back wall, hit the panels, and shoot out the door like a laser beam." "Will it look like soundproofing?" I asked. To an HOA board member who doesn't know an ohm from a hole in the ground, absolutely, it's foam. It's black. It looks expensive. I'll write up an invoice that says acoustic dampening and bass management system. "Tony," I said, "you are an artist." "I try," he said modestly. "I can start now. It'll take me 2 days, and it's going to cost you, but I'll give you the Antiquarian discount." The installation was a spectacle. Tony made sure of it. He parked his truck in the driveway and made a big show of hauling in giant slabs of acoustic foam and heavy wooden panels. Mrs. Higgins watched from her porch, looking smug. She thought she had won. She thought I was finally bowing to her will, spending thousands of dollars to silence my house. "Good to see you taking this seriously, Mark," she called out, as I helped Tony carry a sheet of plywood. "Just trying to be a good neighbor, Brenda," I called back. "Safety first." Tony winked at me. We spent the next 48 hours transforming the spare room. Tony installed thick bass traps in the corners, which actually did help the sound quality inside the room, making the drums punchier. But the pièce de résistance was the array of wooden panels he mounted on the wall, opposite the sliding glass door. They were curved, hardwood, varnished to a shine. They looked beautiful. "These are parabolic reflectors," Tony whispered to me as he screwed the last one in. "Same principle as a satellite dish. Gunnar's kick drum hits the back wall, bounces into these babies, and they focus the frequency right there." He pointed a laser level. The red dot went through the glass door, across the side yard, and landed directly on the center of Mrs. Higgins' master bedroom window. "That," Tony said, is the sweet spot. We finished on a Thursday afternoon. I paid Tony, and he handed me a very official-looking invoice with a lot of technical jargon about frequency mitigation and structural decoupling. "Send that to your board," Tony said. "It's bulletproof." The test run was scheduled for Friday at 10 o'clock a.m. I sent the invoice to the HOA Thursday night, along with a polite email stating that we had invested significantly in professional acoustic treatment to address neighbor concerns. Mrs. Higgins must have felt victorious. She probably thought she was going to enjoy a quiet morning of judging people on Facebook. 10 o'clock a.m. Gunnar sat behind the kit. Toby was in his swing, already starting to fuss. "Ready?" Gunnar asked. "Fire at will," I said. Gunnar started with a slow, heavy groove. Boom bap. Boom bap. Inside the room, the sound was cleaner. The echo was gone. It sounded tight, professional. "Sounds good in here," Gunnar yelled. "How's it outside?" I asked. I walked out the front door and crept around the side of the house. I stood near the property line. It was incredible. Before, the sound had been a general rumble. Now, it was focused. It was sharp. Every kick drum hit felt like a distinct punch to the chest. The acoustic enhancers were working perfectly. They were taking the sound and beaming it directly at Mrs. Higgins' house, like a sonic death ray. I looked at her window. The glass was actually vibrating. I could see the reflection of the sun shaking on the pane. Suddenly, the blinds flew open. Mrs. Higgins' face appeared. She looked confused. Then she looked horrified. She put her hands over her ears. She ran out of her back door, wearing her bathrobe. "It's louder!" she screamed. "How is it louder?" I leaned over the fence. "Morning, Brenda. Just testing the new system. The contractor said it maximizes the tonal clarity." "You said you were soundproofing it," she yelled, trying to be heard over a double bass run that sounded like a helicopter landing. "We did," I shouted back. "We treated the room. It's much better inside. No standing waves." "My teeth are rattling," she shrieked. "That's probably just the bass frequencies decoupling," I explained, using words I barely understood. "It means it's working. It's safer for the foundation this way. The energy is being released instead of stored." She stared at me, mouth agape, as Gunnar switched into a blast beat. Her bathrobe flapped in the breeze. She looked like she was about to explode. "I am calling the board immediately," she screamed, and ran back inside. I walked back into the house. Toby was fast asleep. Gunnar was sweating, a look of pure joy on his face. "Tony is a genius," Gunnar said. "Tony is a god," I agreed. The summons arrived via email 3 days later. It wasn't a fine this time. It was an invitation to a disciplinary hearing. Subject: mandatory appearance. Board hearing regarding Unit 402 noise complaints. Date: Tuesday, July 14th. Time: 7 o'clock p.m. Location: the Oak Creek Community Center, multi-purpose room. B. Agenda 1. Review of noise complaints filed by Mrs. Brenda Higgins. 2. Review of structural damage claims. 3. Assessment of unauthorized business activities. Drumming. 4. Determination of residency status for Mr. Gunnar the Beast Jensen. "Mr. Gunnar the Beast Jensen," Sarah read aloud, snickering. "Did you put that on the form?" "I might have," I admitted. "I thought it added flair." "Mark, this is serious," she said, though she was smiling. "They could evict him, or fine us thousands, or put a lien on the house." "They won't," I said. We have the law, we have the bylaws, we have a sleeping baby, and we have the nuclear option. What's the nuclear option? I invited Gunner's bandmates to come sit in the audience, I said. As concerned citizens. Sarah's eyes went wide. Oh my God. The community center was a beige building that smelled of floor wax and stale coffee. Multi-purpose Room B was set up like a courtroom, which I found hilarious given that the most power these people had was deciding what color mulch we could use. The board sat at a long plastic table on a raised platform. There were 5 of them. In the center sat President Gary. Gary was a man who looked like he had been born wearing a polo shirt tucked into khaki shorts. He had the energy of a high school principal who really wanted to be a warden. To his right was Mrs. Higgins. She was wearing her Sunday best, a pearl necklace, and a look of pure venom. She had a stack of papers in front of her that was thicker than the Bible. The other 3 members looked bored. One was scrolling on her phone. Another was asleep with his eyes open. I walked in with Sarah. I was wearing a button-down shirt and slacks. I looked respectable. I was carrying a briefcase. Gunner walked in behind us. The room went silent. Gunner had dressed up. He was wearing a black button-down shirt with the sleeves cut off, revealing his full tattoo sleeves. He had tied his beard into a neat braid. He was wearing black cargo pants and combat boots. He looked like a mercenary attending a funeral. And behind him came the cavalry. 3 men walked in. One was Spike, the guitarist for Carry-On Luggage. He was skinny, pale, and had hair that defied gravity. He was wearing a leather trench coat. In July. Next was Dozer, the bassist. He was wider than he was tall, and had a nose ring the size of a door knocker. And finally, Grim, the vocalist. Grim looked like a librarian who had seen too much. He was small, wore glasses, and had a t-shirt that said, "I am the void." They sat in the back row, crossing their arms in unison. Mrs. Higgins looked like she was going to faint. President Gary looked nervous. "All right," Gary said, clearing his throat into the microphone. Let's get started. This is the hearing for Mark and Sarah Daniels regarding excessive noise." Mrs. Higgins stood up immediately. "Mr. President, if I may." "Go ahead, Brenda," Gary sighed. "For the past 2 weeks," she began, her voice trembling with theatrical emotion, "my life has been a living hell. These people have turned our peaceful sanctuary into a heavy metal concert venue. The noise is constant. It is deafening. My china shakes. My dog is traumatized. And when I asked them to stop, they installed soundproofing that somehow made it louder. It is a targeted campaign of harassment." She slapped a photo onto the table. It was a blurry picture of Gunner carrying a cymbal stand. "Look at this," she cried. "Look at the equipment. This is industrial machinery. It doesn't belong in a home." Gary looked at the photo. "Okay, Brenda, we see it." He turned to me. "Mr. Daniels, what do you have to say?" I stood up. I opened my briefcase. "Mr. President, members of the board," I said calmly, "I would like to present Exhibit A." I handed Gary a copy of the police report from Officer Miller. "This is an official report from the Oak Creek Police Department," I said. Dated July 8th. Officer Miller measured the decibel level at the property line during peak practice hours. The reading was 68 decibels. The legal limit, per HOA Bylaw 4.3, is 85 decibels. Gary read the report. He frowned. 68 Correct, I said. That is quieter than a leaf blower. Quieter than Mrs. Higgins' own air. Conditioning unit, which I measured at 72 decibels yesterday. Mrs. Higgins gasped. That is a lie! I have the video, I said, holding up a flash drive. Would you like to see it? Gary waved his hand. No, move on. Exhibit B, I continued, handing him Tony's invoice. Mrs. Higgins claims we ignored her complaints. On the contrary, we spent $20,500 hiring a licensed contractor to install acoustic treatment to mitigate the sound. We have taken every reasonable step to be good neighbors. Gary looked at the invoice. Tony's rigging and renovation. Looks legit. Acoustic dampening system. He looked at Mrs. Higgins. Brenda, they soundproofed the room. It didn't work, she shrieked. It made it directional. It's like a laser beam of noise. Sound cannot be a laser beam, Brenda, the bored woman on the board said, looking up from her phone. That's not how science works. Thank you, I said to the woman. And finally, I said, Exhibit C. I gestured to Gunnar. He stood up. The floor creaked. This is Mr. Jensen, I said. He is my tenant. He works nights. He practices during the day because he is a professional musician. But more importantly, I paused for dramatic effect. Since Mr. Jensen began practicing, the number of noise complaints regarding my infant son crying has dropped to 0. The room was silent. You see, I explained, my son has severe colic. He screams for hours. It's a medical condition. Mrs. Higgins called the police on him. She threatened CPS. I saw the other board members stiffen. Calling the cops on a baby was a low blow, even for an HOA. But, I continued, the rhythmic, low-frequency vibration of the drums soothes him. When Gunnar plays, the baby sleeps. When Gunnar stops, the baby screams. So, members of the board, you have a choice. You can ban the drums, in which case the screaming will return at all hours of the night, and Mrs. Higgins will continue to call the police on a 4-month-old child. Or, you can allow Mr. Jensen to practice his art for 4 hours a day during legal times and maintain the peace. Gunnar cleared his throat. Mr. President? Gary looked terrified. Yes. Mr. Beast? It's just Gunnar, sir, he said, his voice deep and smooth. I just want to say, I love this neighborhood. I keep my lawn mowed. I take my bins in on time. I even helped Mrs. Robinson down the street carry her groceries yesterday. He did, an old lady in the back row shouted. He's a lovely young man. Very strong. Gunnar smiled. I'm not here to cause trouble. I'm just a guy trying to make music. And if my music helps a baby sleep, that's just a bonus. Mrs. Higgins was vibrating. This is absurd. He is a hooligan. Look at his friends. She pointed at the back row. Spike, the guitarist in the trench coat, stood up slowly. Excuse me, ma'am, Spike said. He had a British accent for some reason. I am not a hooligan. I am a classically trained cellist who happens to prefer the electric guitar. And Dozer over there? He's a pediatric nurse. Dozer waved his hand, his nose ring glinting. Nice you. 12 years. Mrs. Higgins's jaw dropped. And Grimm? Spike pointed to the vocalist. He's a librarian, head of archives at the city library. Grimm adjusted his glasses. Shh, he whispered. The room erupted in laughter. Even President Gary cracked a smile. Order! Order! Gary banged his gavel, but he wasn't really trying. He looked at Mrs. Higgins. She looked defeated. She looked small. Brenda, Gary said, the evidence is clear. They are compliant with the decibel limits. They have attempted to soundproof. And honestly, if it stops the baby from crying, I think we should give them a medal, not a fine." "I move to dismiss the complaints," the bored woman said. "Seconded," said the sleeping guy, waking up. "All in favor?" Gary asked. "Aye," said everyone except Brenda. "Motion carried," Gary said. He looked at me. "Mr. Daniels, your tenant can stay. The drumming can continue. Just try to keep it under 85 decibels." "We will, sir," I said. Mrs. Higgins stood up. She gathered her papers. She looked at me with eyes full of hate. "This isn't over," she hissed. "Actually, Brenda," I said, smiling, "I think it is. The fat lady didn't sing. The metal drummer played. And he won." She stormed out of the room. Gunnar walked up to me and high-fived me. It stung my hand. "Drinks on me," Gunnar said. "The band is heading to O'Malley's. You coming?" "I have a baby," I said. "And for the first time in months, I think I can go home and actually sleep." "Go home, Dad," Gunnar said. "I'll bring you a kebab."